In 399 BC, the great philosopher Socrates was put on trial for impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens. After being found guilty, he was sentenced to death by drinking a cup of poison. His trial and his death is intensively recorded. Socrates is one of history's most enigmatic figures precisely because he left no writings of his own. Yet the evidence for his existence is surprisingly strong, thanks to multiple independent sources from his own time. Socrates didn't leave behind any writings himself. Everything we know about him comes from his students, like Plato and Xenophon. Quite the legacy for someone who never put pen to parchment. Xenophon, another student who portrayed Socrates in a more practical and less philosophical light. His works include Memorabilia, Apology, and Symposium. Aristophanes, a comic playwright, who satirized Socrates in the clouds. Though exaggerated, it confirms Socrates was a well-known public figure. Aristotle was born after Socrates died, but he references him often and distinguishes Socrates' ideas from Plato. Multiple sources from his time mention him in branches like philosophy, comedy, history. These disciplines disagree about his personality and character, which ironically reaffirm the idea that Socrates was a real person. His teachings influenced the creation of the Socratic school led by Antisthenes, Aristippus, and Euclid. So if we cannot read or hear his voice in writing, we can see and hear his echo in other contemporary philosophers of his time. That is undeniable. This man walked the streets of Athens more than 2,000 years ago. Going retrospectively, Aristotle was born in the year 470 BCE. He was born in a district of Athens. Though born in modest circumstances, he had full Athenian citizenship. His father Saperniscus was a stonemason or a sculptor. His mother Phanerite was a midwife, so he was born in the working class. He received the standard classic Athenian education, grammar, music, and gymnastics, but philosophical development came later with personal studies and thought. Socrates served as a hoplite as an armed infantryman in the Peloponnesian War. He was known for his bravery and endurance in harsh conditions. Ancient sources describe him as unattractive, short with bulged eyes, but his intellect compensated his physical appearance. He spent much of his time debating fellow Athenians in public, challenging assumptions in the search for truth through dialogue, which is now known as the Socratic method. He was not interested in material possessions. He was more interested in the affairs of the soul. One of his famous quotes is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Socrates died in 399 BCE by drinking a cup with hemlock, a toxic plant that causes paralysis and respiratory failure, a sentence handed down by an Athenian jury after he was found guilty of impiety and corrupting the youth. Socrates was accused of disrespecting the gods of Athens and introducing new ones. He was also accused of corrupting the youth and questioning the government, which many saw as dangerous in a time of political instability. Despite his eloquent defense, he was convicted. The jurors voted 280 against 211. His sentence was exile, or the death penalty by poison. Socrates chose the latter. He chose his death instead of fleeing Athens in exile. Socrates walked until his legs grew numb. He then lay down and passed away peacefully. His final words were, "We owe a rooster to Asclepius, the god of healing," maybe referring to death as a kind of cure. His death became a symbol of integrity and resistance against unjust authority. All of this evidence shows that Socrates was a real person who lived in ancient Athens. Socrates refused leaving Athens or stopped teaching philosophy. He instead chose death, which shows that for him was more important, his principles than self-preservation. His idea that an unexamined life is not worth living inspired Western thought on critical thinking, self-reflection, and intellectual honesty. Socrates thought that virtue is tied to knowledge. If you truly understand what is good, you'll do good. Concepts that later resounded in Plato and Aristotle. Martin Luther King referenced Socrates in his letter from Birmingham jail, saying that just laws must align with moral laws. Gandhi, who was a proponent of non-violence, echoed similarly as Socrates did. And Nelson Mandela, standing against apartheid, resonated what Socrates did more than 2,000 years ago. Socrates' death was not a tragic end, it was a powerful beginning. His actions were seed that would set in motion generations of thinkers who challenge injustice with moral conviction. According to Plato, Socrates was a wise man who knew that he didn't know anything. He was always asking questions and trying to understand the world around him. He was also very brave and wasn't afraid to speak his mind, even if it made people angry. Cleinias was one of Plato's characters in his dialogue called The Republic, and he claimed to be a student of Socrates. Socrates was more like a mentor for the ideal young mind. But if Plato invented Socrates, then he would have invented Cleinias too. And Cleinias was part of Socrates' circle. Another reason why Socrates must have been real is because we have lots of historical records that corroborate details of his life. For example, there is an inscription on a vase that reads, "This vase belonged to Socrates." We also have another inscription which commemorates a victory of an athletic competition, took place in the archonship of a man named Callias. We know from other sources that Callias was an archon in 440 BC, and that he had a brother named Chaerephon, who was friends with Socrates. All of this evidence shows that Socrates was a real person who lived in ancient Athens. Some would say that Socrates was Plato's invention. He wrote and put Socrates on his pages. If Plato invented Socrates, then he would have invented Cleinias too. Another curiosity is that Chaerephon was a close friend and follower of Socrates. He is mentioned in Plato's, Aristotle's, and Xenophonte's works. Was he who consulted the Delphos oracle and provoked the famous phrase, "There is nobody wiser than Socrates"? In the comedy, The Aristophane Clouds, Chaerephon appears as his assistant, which suggests that he was a public recognized figure of his time. These should suffice to show that the argument that Socrates was not a real person is simply not very plausible. So was Socrates a real person? Yes, he was. He was born in 470 BCE and was executed in 399 BCE, as we just saw. How does his death affect us today? Socrates' death affects us today because he is still an important figure in philosophy. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, give us a like and comment. Check out other videos in Wonderverse where we explore science and politics and everything in between.